Before you spend another these quarters, stop for 10 seconds, because one small detail could turn it from pocket change into a life-changing discovery. If you have this coin in your hands right now, you are already standing on something most people don't even realize they've missed in life. Something so small, so ordinary looking at first glance, yet hiding a story that connects history, art, national identity, and a value that can shock even experienced collectors. It all begins with a simple-looking quarter, the kind that passes through millions of hands every single day in the United States. People use it for vending machines, parking meters, coffee shops, and small change without ever stopping for a second to think about what it actually represents. But the 2020 State Quarters National Park Series is not just loose change. It is part of a final chapter in one of the most famous coin programs in modern American history, a program that quietly transformed everyday pocket money into a canvas of national storytelling. To understand why this coin has reached such an unbelievable level of interest, you have to go back to the foundation of the 50 State Quarters program, which began years earlier. The idea was simple but powerful. Each state would be honored with a unique design that reflected its identity, culture, and heritage. What started as a commemorative effort soon became a cultural phenomenon. Millions of people who had never paid attention to coins suddenly started collecting them, searching pocket change, and building albums filled with miniature works of art. By the time the program evolved into its later stages, it had expanded beyond states and entered a new phase inspired by America's national parks and historic sites. The 2020 quarters continued this legacy, capturing landscapes, monuments, and natural wonders that define the country's identity. These designs were not random. They were carefully chosen symbols meant to represent beauty, history, and preservation, all engraved into metal smaller than a coin you can cover with your thumb. But what makes the 2020 quarters especially fascinating is not just their design, but what happened behind the scenes during their production. Coins are supposed to be identical. That is the entire point of mass minting. Yet history has repeatedly shown that perfection is almost impossible in large-scale production. Slight variations, minting errors, and rare anomalies begin to appear, and it is exactly these imperfections that turn ordinary coins into extraordinary treasures. Collectors began noticing subtle differences in some 2020 quarters. Certain strikes appeared sharper, others had unusual doubling effects, and a few had minting inconsistencies that were not supposed to exist. At first, these variations were ignored by the general public. After all, who examines a quarter closely enough to notice tiny differences in lettering or texture? But in the world of numismatics, these small details are everything. As interest grew, collectors started setting aside rolls of 2020 quarters, hoping to find rare variations. What they discovered slowly changed the entire conversation around these coins. Some versions of the 2020 quarters began appearing in high-grade conditions that were unusually well preserved, almost untouched by circulation. Others showed rare minting characteristics that made them significantly more valuable than their face value. This is where the story becomes even more intense. When a coin transitions from everyday currency into a collectible asset, its value is no longer controlled by what it was meant to be, but by what collectors are willing to pay for its rarity, condition, and historical significance. And in the case of certain 2020 State Quarters National Park issues, that value started climbing far beyond expectations. People who had ignored coins for years suddenly began checking their change jars, drawers, and old collections. The idea that something so ordinary could hide something extraordinary created a wave of excitement. Online communities, coin forums, and collector groups started analyzing every detail, comparing mint marks, inspecting surfaces under magnification, and documenting variations that most people would never notice in a lifetime. What makes this even more surprising is how recent these coins are. Unlike ancient coins or discontinued historical currency, these are modern issues. That means most people assume they cannot possibly be valuable yet. But that assumption is exactly what makes them so interesting. Modern rarity is often hidden in plain sight because people are not actively looking for it. The 2020 quarters also carry a deeper emotional value for collectors because they represent the closing era of a long-running US coin series. End-of-series coins often gain attention because they symbolize completion. Once production ends or transitions, collectors begin to view final-year issues as historically significant milestones rather than just currency. And in some cases, Certain high-grade specimens or rare mint variations of these quarters have been evaluated at astonishing levels, with reports and collector discussions suggesting values reaching into the tens of thousands depending on condition, rarity, and demand. But here is where the real mystery begins, and where most people make a critical mistake. They assume that value is only about age. In reality, value in coin collecting is driven by three things: rarity, condition, and demand. A coin does not need to be old to be rare. It just needs to be difficult to find in a specific condition or variation. That is why modern coins like the 2020 quarters can sometimes surprise even experts. If you continue watching this story unfold, you will understand exactly what separates a normal 2020 quarter from one that could potentially change how you look at loose change forever. Because somewhere among millions of identical-looking coins, a few stand out in ways most people will never notice unless they know what to look for. And that is where everything begins to shift. At first glance, it looks like just another modern US quarter. Nothing flashy, nothing that screams value, nothing that suggests it could ever be something special. But that is exactly how most valuable coins begin their story, quietly, unnoticed, hiding in plain sight while the world overlooks them. The 2013 Mount Rushmore quarter belongs to the America the Beautiful Quarters program, a series created to honor national parks and historic landmarks across the United States. Each design was chosen carefully, not just for beauty, but for meaning. And Mount Rushmore was one of the most powerful symbols selected in the entire series. To understand why this coin matters, you have to understand what it represents. Mount Rushmore is not just a mountain. It is a massive carved tribute to leadership, vision, and the shaping of a nation's identity. The faces of 4 U.S. presidents, George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Theodore Roosevelt, and Abraham Lincoln, are carved into granite in a way that makes history feel permanent. This is not decoration. This is memory carved into stone. Now imagine taking that monument and shrinking its essence into a coin you can hold between your fingers. That is exactly what the US Mint attempted in 2013. The design on the reverse side of the quarter captures the iconic sculpture of Mount Rushmore with incredible detail for such a small surface. Every line, every shadow, every carved feature is compressed into a space smaller than a postage stamp. It is not just engraving, it is storytelling in metal form. But what makes this coin truly interesting is not just its design. It is the production era it belongs to. By 2013, the America the Beautiful series was well underway, and millions upon millions of coins were being minted and circulated. Most of them were released into everyday use with no special attention. People spent them without a second thought. They were used for groceries, parking meters, vending machines, and forgotten in jars and drawers. Yet in every large production run, something important happens. Not every coin comes out exactly the same. Slight variations appear. Some coins are struck with sharper detail, others show minor imperfections in the die, and a few rare pieces escape into circulation with characteristics that were never intended to reach the public. These variations are where the real story begins. Collectors who study coins like the 2013 Mount Rushmore quarter often look beyond face value. They examine strike quality, mint marks, surface condition, and microscopic details that most people would never notice. Under magnification, what looks like a normal coin can reveal subtle differences that completely change its classification in the collector world. Some examples of these quarters exist in near-perfect condition, untouched by circulation, preserved as if they were never meant to be spent. These are known as high-grade specimens, and in the world of coin collecting, condition can dramatically influence desirability. Then there are era variations. These are the unexpected mistakes that occur during minting. Sometimes the design is slightly misaligned. Sometimes there is doubling in the lettering or image. Sometimes the strike pressure creates unusual textures that were never part of the original design intention. These coins are not common, and when they are found in strong condition, they immediately attract attention from serious collectors. What makes the 2013 Mount Rushmore quarter especially fascinating is how easily it can be overlooked. Unlike older coins that people expect to be valuable, this is modern currency. It still looks new enough that most people assume it has no collector interest at all. That assumption alone is what allows rare examples to remain undiscovered for years. Across the collector community, interest in America the Beautiful quarters has steadily grown, not because every coin is rare, but because certain versions are unexpectedly difficult to find in top condition. As time passes, coins naturally wear down in circulation. Finding a flawless example becomes harder every year, and scarcity begins to build silently. The Mount Rushmore design adds another layer to its appeal. It is not just a park or landscape, it is one of the most recognized monuments in the world. That emotional recognition increases demand among collectors, especially those who focus on U.S. historical themes. When a coin carries both artistic detail and national symbolism, it gains a kind of cultural weight that goes beyond its metal content. And this is where people start to get surprised. Because while most 2013 Mount Rushmore quarters are still worth only face value, certain exceptional examples, those in perfect condition or with rare mint characteristics, can command significantly higher prices in collector markets. The gap between ordinary and extraordinary is not obvious at first glance, but in numismatics, that gap is everything. There are collectors who spend years searching for a single perfect example of a coin like this. Not because it is made of precious metal, but because it represents completion of a set, perfection of condition, or the discovery of something rare that most people never notice. If you are holding one of these coins right now, the real question is not whether it is valuable in the general sense. The real question is whether it belongs to the massive majority of circulated examples, or the small, overlooked group that carries collector significance. Because in coin collecting, value is never just about what something is. It is about what it could be in the right condition, in the right market, at the right moment. And sometimes, the difference between a simple 25-cent coin and a highly sought-after collectible is nothing more than details so small that most people never stop long enough to see them. If you want, I can continue with part 2 where we go deeper into mint marks, specific era types, collector pricing behavior, and how certain 2013 Mount Rushmore quarters can rise far above face value in today's market. And that is exactly why coins like the 2013 Mount Rushmore quarter should never be dismissed as ordinary change. Because what most people overlook in their daily life often becomes the very thing collectors spend years searching for. A coin that once passed unnoticed in a pocket can suddenly turn into a story, a discovery, and in rare cases, something far more valuable than anyone expected. If you have been watching closely, you already understand the real message behind this coin. It is not just about Mount Rushmore carved into metal. It is about how history, design, and rarity can quietly exist inside something so common that people forget to even look at it. And that is where opportunities are often missed, not in what is rare, but in what is ignored. So before you spend your next quarter without thinking, take a moment. Look at it carefully. Check the details. Notice the condition. Because the difference between a normal coin and a collectible one is not always obvious at first glance. Sometimes it is hidden in the smallest imperfections, the sharpness of a strike, or simply the fact that it survived in better condition than millions of others. And if you do happen to find one in exceptional condition, something clean, sharp, and untouched by time, you are no longer just holding spare change. You are holding a piece of modern history that collectors understand very well, even if the average person does not. That is the quiet power of coin collecting. It rewards attention, patience, and curiosity. And it turns everyday objects into something far more meaningful than their original purpose. Because in the end, value is not always about age or material. It is about rarity, condition, and the stories that people are willing to attach to it over time. So keep your eyes open. You never know what might already be sitting in your hands, waiting to be discovered. If you have ever come across the 2019 War in the Pacific National Historical Park quarter, you might have held it for only a moment before spending it without a second thought. It looks like just another modern coin, clean edges, standard design, nothing that would make you pause. But behind that small piece of metal is a story rooted in one of the most intense chapters of world history, and a reminder that even the smallest objects can carry the weight of war, sacrifice, and survival. This coin is part of the America the Beautiful Quarters program, a series created to honor national parks and historic sites across the United States. But this specific design is different in emotional tone compared to many others. It does not celebrate beauty alone. It remembers conflict. It preserves memory. It reflects a battlefield that existed across oceans, islands, and human endurance. The War in the Pacific National Historical Park is located in Guam, a place that became a critical and devastating battleground during World War II. In 1941, after the attack on Pearl Harbor, Japanese forces moved rapidly across the Pacific. Guam, then a U.S. territory, was invaded and occupied. What followed was years of hardship for the local Chamorro people and American forces, as the island became part of a larger struggle for control of the Pacific theater. The coin design captures this history in a quiet but powerful way. It shows a landing craft approaching the shore, symbolizing the return of American forces during the liberation of Guam in 1944. The moment represented is not just military movement, but liberation after occupation. It is the turning point where control began to shift back across the Pacific. For a coin so small, the emotional weight it carries is enormous. What makes this even more interesting is how this design transforms a violent and complex historical event into something educational and reflective. Coins are often seen as neutral objects, but in reality, they are miniature history books. Every engraving choice is intentional. Every symbol is selected to communicate meaning without words. And in this case, the landing scene is not just a depiction of war, but a representation of resilience and return. When the coin was released in 2019, millions entered circulation almost immediately. Most people did not notice anything unusual about it. That is normal. Modern quarters are designed to blend into everyday life. They pass through hands quickly, used for small transactions, often forgotten within minutes. But collectors see something different when they look at coins like this. They see the beginning of time passing. Because once a coin enters circulation, it begins to change. It gets scratched, worn, faded. The sharpness of the original design slowly disappears. And as years go by, finding one in perfect condition becomes more difficult. That is where attention starts to shift from currency to collectible. The War in the Pacific Quarter is particularly interesting to collectors who focus on modern U.S. commemorative issues. Not because it is made of rare material, but because it represents a specific moment in the final years of a long-running national park series. Completion matters in coin collecting. Series completion often drives demand, especially when collectors try to assemble full sets in high-grade condition. There is also something deeper that influences interest in coins like this. Historical significance tied to human conflict often creates emotional value. Coins that represent war, liberation, or national turning points tend to attract attention beyond just financial collecting. They become conversation pieces. They become educational tools. They become reminders of events that shaped entire generations. Some collectors actively search for these quarters in uncirculated condition, often checking bank rolls or mint sets. The difference between a circulated coin and a pristine example might seem small to most people, but in numismatics, condition is everything. A coin that has never been used in commerce preserves the original detail exactly as it left the mint. Every line in the design remains sharp, every texture intact, every symbol clear. If you want, I can turn this into a full YouTube viral script version with stronger hooks, suspense pacing, and a high retention structure for your channel. And that is the real meaning hidden inside the 2019 War in the Pacific Quarter, something most people will never notice as it passes through their hands in everyday life. Because at first, it looks like just another modern coin. Something ordinary. Something replaceable. But once you understand what it represents, it stops being a just change and becomes a small reminder of a much larger story, war, survival, and the long road to liberation in the Pacific. Coins like this don't shout their value. They don't demand attention. They wait. They move quietly through circulation, through pockets, cash registers, and coin jars, until someone finally stops long enough to really look at them. And that is where most people miss the point. The true value of coins like this is not only in collecting or rarity. It is in awareness. In noticing history embedded inside something so small that it usually gets ignored. In realizing that even everyday currency can carry the memory of real events that shaped entire regions and generations. So if you ever come across this quarter again, don't rush past it. Turn it in your hand. Look at the design. Think about what it represents. Because sometimes, the most powerful stories are not found in museums or books, they are found in the small details we handle every single day without thinking. And in the world of coin collecting, that simple moment of attention is exactly where discovery begins.